and 21 of the Standing Committee on International Trade. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, August the 21st, 2024, the committee is resuming its study on protecting certain Canadian manufacturing sectors, including electric vehicles, aluminum and steel, against related Chinese imports and measures. We have with us today Honourable Mary Ng, Minister of Export Promotion, International Trade and Economic Development. From the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, Rob Stewart, Deputy Minister, International Trade, and Aaron Fowler, Associate Assistant Deputy Minister, Trade Policy and Negotiations. Welcome to you all. We will start with opening remarks and then proceed with rounds of questions. Minister Ng, we're very glad to have you with us today. Thank you very much. And I'll turn the floor over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
The committee members, it's a real pleasure to be here today to assist you with your important work, and always an honor to speak to Canadians from coast to coast to coast through your work at the committee. Ensuring a level playing field for Canada's auto manufacturing sector and its workers, including the emerging electric vehicle sector and its related supply chains, is a priority for me and for my government. We're at a pivotal moment for global trade as we navigate the transition to a green economy. From technological advances reshaping industries to shifts in global supply chains, the move towards a sustainable, zero-emission future is reshaping our economic landscape. This is a critical inflection point where the decisions we make will shape the future of our planet and our economy. Electric vehicles and its supply chains is a key piece of that global shift towards a net zero economy, and this is a strategic sector and one that is critical to Canada and to Canadian workers. Canada's auto manufacturing industry supports over 500,000 good-paying Canadian jobs, many of which are unionized, and our EV supply chain has the potential to be ranked first in the world. Unfortunately, Canada's EV sector and its workers are facing acute threats from unfair competition from China, which is why our government made the necessary decision to address this threat head-on. Since 2015, the Government of Canada has invested over $120 billion in climate action and clean growth. By focusing on innovation and green jobs and by working with like-minded partners, Canada will build a more resilient, sustainable, and competitive economy. Canada has the raw materials, expertise, energy, and skilled workforce required to pursue these goals and to help lead the global transition to a net zero economy. To meet the challenges and indeed to seize the opportunities, the government is working hard to attract investments in EV manufacturing and its related supply chains. These efforts have already provided real returns, with major investments by leaders such as Stellantis, GM, Honda, Volkswagen, Nexstar, and Northvolt attracting over $44 billion worth of investments to expand Canada's EV production capacity along the supply chain. These investments, combined with the existing government incentives for people who buy EVs, will play an important role in building Canada's clean economy and securing long-term opportunities for workers in the sector. These investments will provide generational opportunities for Canadian workers by promoting growth, anchoring supply chains, maintaining Canada's key role in an integrated North American auto sector, and supporting a shift to the net zero economy. Cependant, la compétitivité du
However, Canada's competitiveness is at serious risk of being undermined due to unfair competition from China.
Sectors benefit from non-market policies and practices that have heavily tilted the playing field in China's favor and led to a significant overcapacity in EV production. China's policies have included pervasive subsidization, insufficient labor and environmental standards, and other measures that artificially lower production costs. As a result of these unfair advantages, China's global EV exports have grown exponentially, distorting global trade and preventing fair competition. These practices not only hurt our workers and our economies, but global trade and security more broadly. They are also undermining the multilateral trading system and the WTO rules, which are not designed for the challenges of this nature. This is a matter of a concern across the economic sectors that affect us all. Canada is not alone in responding to China's non-market policies and practices. Several other trading nations have taken measures to defend their industries from Chinese overcapacity. On September the 27th, the United States increased Section 301 tariffs on EV, steel, aluminum, EV batteries, critical minerals, solar products, and other goods imported from China. On October the 4th, the EU member states voted to impose countervailing duties on Chinese EVs on a definite basis. Canada must not become a destination to dump Chinese exports diverted from other markets. And during our consultations in July, Canadian industry and our workers confirmed that exceptional measures are required to address this extraordinary threat and to defend our economic security. It's why Canada announced a series of exceptional measures on imports from China to protect our emerging EV sector and the related supply chains. These include 100% surtax on Chinese EVs effective October the 1st, a surtax on 25% for Chinese steel and aluminum effective tomorrow, a consultation on potential surtaxes on imports from Chinese batteries to battery parts, semiconductors, solar products, and critical mineral products. And Chinese EVs and EV chargers are no longer eligible for Canada's incentive programs. We fully support the multilateral rules-based system. We firmly believe that a strong multilateral set of rules is the best long-term approach to effectively address trade distortive measures, and the WTO has to have an essential role to play in ensuring a level playing field. Canada's goal is to have an even stronger international rules that better address these policies and practices that are at odds with a fair and open market-based trading system. Madam Chair, we stand firmly with Canadian businesses and workers and will continue to protect them from the challenges posed by unfair trade practices. For too long, past trade policies overlook the environment and labor rights and the inclusion of SMEs, women-owned businesses, Indigenous peoples, and others who have historically been underrepresented in our economy. We can no longer afford trade policies that ignore climate change and that is not inclusive. We must invest in our communities and celebrate our success. If we're going to emerge as the economic leaders of the 21st century, and I truly believe that we are in a strong position to do so, we need to face our challenges head-on, respond with ambition. Confident countries invest in themselves and their people, and that's exactly what our government is doing. That's what we're focused on. I'm more optimistic than ever about Canada's ability to meet the moment. Merci.
Thank you very much, Minister. We appreciate that. On to our questioning. Mr. Williams for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here today. Minister, with 70% of our trade tied to the U.S., only 5% with China, we still run a $50 billion deficit. The Americans acted on Chinese tariffs in February, where your government delayed until June. Why did we wait 4 months?
First, let me congratulate my honorable trade critic colleague. It's the first time that we're at this committee together, so I look forward to getting questions, albeit I suspect tough from you, but very, very pleased to be answering them. You've seen that we've taken strong action and that the tariffs against the EVs are aligned to those of the United States. It was really important to actually also talk to Canadian industry, which we did through consultations with the various sectors that are affected. And as I said earlier in my opening remarks, those tariffs are now in place for imports of Chinese EVs into this country.
So, Minister, one concern we have is one thing, when we look at 70% of trade, it's $500 million worth of trade that goes back and forth, or $500 billion worth of trade that goes back and forth between the borders, is we have a mandate on EVs in Canada. So by 2035, it's a ban on gas combustion engines. And when we look at, and that includes hybrid as well, and we look at the Americans, they don't have that ban. So when we're looking at what's happening between the U.S. and Canada, it seems that the fact that we waited 4 months to look at tariffs, and the Americans looked at February, we didn't look at it till June, was the fact that we have to rely on imports from China, whether that be critical minerals or EVs, to fulfill the mandate that Canada has that the U.S. don't. Is that true?
No. Canada has taken very, very firm action to both fight climate change, but also build an economy that is a green economy. Having a good ambition to have electric vehicles in this country by 2030 is an achievable target. At the same time, investing, as I said, since 2015, $120 billion worth of investment to create a green economy, a sustainable economy, means that those investments to build out the supply chain from critical minerals to processing to the manufacturing of parts to building these EVs in Canada to the end of cycle in recycling, which I think there's some really great work happening by companies in British Columbia. It's important to do both. And ultimately, it's important to have a plan to fight climate, but also build the industries and all of those, from mining to recycling to processing
sorry,
to
Minister, I only have so much time. So do you believe that the 2035 mandate is needed in order to fulfill that mandate, where we buy 80% of our critical mineral resources from China?
Important that we do everything we can to attract investment from critical minerals and the processing, which great Canadian mining companies are doing, to which Indigenous peoples are part of negotiating and
Minister,
working on
we're
those.
not doing that. We buy 80+% of our critical minerals from China. So do you believe the 2035 mandate is something you believe in and Canada needs in order to fulfill our trade mandate?
You're making the assumption that we will keep buying in that order of magnitude in 2035. And I'm saying to you that here, with $120 billion worth of investments to green our economy, will actually allow Canada to be processing those critical minerals, extracting those critical minerals in a sustainable way, sharing them with our partners, whether it's the United States or Europe or Australia or Korea or Japan, and having a real plan to fight climate change, while also building out those very, very critical industries, from critical minerals to processing, to all of the parts, to manufacturing, and to end of life.
It's taking right now 10 years average to get those critical minerals out of the ground. We haven't even started any of those mines. We're not even mining lithium in Canada right now, a critical component to batteries. So we're not doing that, which means we need that from China. This week, Oliver Zipse, the CEO of BMW, warned the EU ban on the sale of gasoline and diesel cars from 2035 is no longer realistic. He will see a massive shrinking with such a ban in the European market. Do you believe the same thing's true in Canada?
I believe that the plan we have, working with Canadian industries, with manufacturers, with our skilled people, with the technology that will be there to support these industries, will make Canada the most competitive place on earth to build out these industries. And I think that you could look at the record of the range of investments and the investments that we're attracting, and the commitment by businesses and companies and investors to build along not only this value chain, but in hydrogen, in electricity,
Thank you so much,
nuclear.
Mr. I only have one more minute left. So once again, we're looking at a mandate that is hurting our industries right now. It is a mandate where we're seeing massive dominance of Chinese mined minerals, not from Canada, and it's having an effect on our workers. We look at that relationship with the Americans and the fact that we didn't mirror those tariff rebates right away. We're not even looking right now. The Americans have already went further to talk about software and hardware on Chinese-made cars. The retribution has been, we feel, softwood lumber, where we saw 3,000 workers lose their jobs in the forestry sector. But more importantly, canola farmers. We have 43,000 farms that farm canola, and we're seeing their livelihoods under the gun right now. Why didn't we take better action to protect that industry, knowing that that would be a retribution from tariffs to China?
Well, I think it was your party who also agreed that we should actually place tariffs. And I would also say that to Canada's canola sector, I've said this publicly, we have the best agri-food and the best canola sector in the world. And I'm looking forward to continue to defend our agri-food sector at international fora. And I don't think that anyone in the world has ever accused Canada of, and certainly the agricultural sector, of not playing by the rules.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sheehan, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your testimony and for your action on various things related to the trade file. But yeah, I'm from Sault Ste. Marie, and Sault Ste. Marie is known as a steel town. When I was first elected, Algoma Steel was in bankruptcy protection. It was a right up on the ropes. And Tenaris Tubes, who you have been to, had 24 people working there. Today, Algoma Steel, after actions taken by this government and you protecting the steel industry, because in 2016, our first budget, we put in place trade remedies to stop the dumped steel. Because when I met with this industry right after being elected, when I met with the United Steelworkers, they blamed, like squarely, the previous Conservative government for their lack of action on dumped steel. So I want to fast forward to your latest actions to strengthen the steel industry and protect Canadian jobs and workers. Can you please tell us more about the 25% tariff on the dumped steel that is coming from China, as well as the protections for the auto sector, where 1/3 of the steel goes into, the 100%, as well as some of the actions that were taken when Trump put his 232 tariffs on Canadian steel. We did our anti-tariffs. And again, the Conservatives called our anti-tariffs dumb. They weren't dumb. We won. So please.
Thank you very much. It was terrific to be at Tenaris when they were, when I was there, and they were making an announcement to expand that plant. Expanding that plant means jobs for people in your community, and these are steel workers, union-paid workers, and these are jobs, and they're jobs in Canada. So whether it is there or whether it is, in Hamilton around Dofasco and ArcelorMittal, there are just. It is such an important sector that we must protect to create more opportunities for those jobs and those workers. The 25% tariff on steel and aluminum is directly in response to the overcapacity that we are seeing and experiencing, not only here in Canada, but indeed globally around the world. I mean, when I am at international fora like the OECD, and we are presented with data that shares the overcapacity of steel on the global marketplace, in part because of deliberate policy for that overproduction or oversubsidization. It is distorting the world. It is distorting the trading system. So, taking action on those tariffs, the 25% is going into effect tomorrow. But the other thing we also did was implement a country of melt and pour as well, something that the steel industry had been asking for. So we've implemented that so that, again, we have greater transparency about where the steel is coming from. Again, another measure that will help support the Canadian steel industry. I'm pleased to always work with you and with members of the Steel Caucus because of the strong voices that's directly connected to those companies that you do so much work in to support.
Bloomberg just recently stated that Canada is now the premier global destination for attracting FDI, foreign direct investment, in the EV space. So in your opinion, what comprehensive advantages does Canada have that make it such an attractive place to invest?
Well, strong and predictable trading environment is one, with excellent trade agreements, not only here in North America, but around the world. Companies like Volkswagen, who made significant investments in Canada, it was a choice to invest in Canada. I think what they see is incredible skills of the Canadian people that we invest in. They see a real plan, a real action plan to fight climate change, and therefore investing in a very important production facility that will build out EVs. They can be assured that the rules-based system here in Canada will create that predictability for them, and it is the incentives that we have also put in place as well, making deliberate investments and incentives so that we can build out this sector in a really strong way, I think is what you are seeing. So deliberate action that the government has taken to fight climate change and build an economy that is green and that will work for everyone, that includes making strategic investments in this sector, I think are all factors that went into these various investments that have come in. And like I said earlier, $120 billion, to create a green economy, invested through tax credits and a whole range of other measures. But we are seeing $44 billion of investment specifically in the EV supply chain. And I think companies and their boards make decisions on Canada as a destination for all of the very strong features that I just talked about. But it really is having a plan to fight climate change and to build this sector right here in Canada.
20 seconds remaining, sir.
Thank you very much. I'll just make a statement. A study that we're undertaking right now, both the Canadian steel producers and the United Steelworkers have stated that, the work that you have done is significantly strengthening the steel industry and creating future opportunities. So thank you very much for your testimony today and your work.
Thank you very much. Mr. Savard-Tremblay, for 6 minutes, please.
Madame la Présidente, merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister, and those who are with you for being here today. Do you have your earpiece in? Yes? Okay, great. We all agree upon the idea that China is not a trade partner that respects international trade rules. We know about their dumping practices, amongst other things. One thing that's dangerous is the fact that they use forced labor. There are imports that come from Xinjiang. And we have numbers from the government that tell us that nothing has been seized. Whereas in the United States, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act has led to a large amount of goods being seized, millions of dollars of goods. Zero in Canada, though. March 2020, in the budget, it was stated that before the end of the year, there would be an act to ban products from forced labor. March 2024, this did not happen, even though they committed to this. Again, it was stated that there would be a law on forced labor coming from the government by the end of 2024. Now it's October 21st. There's not a lot of time left this year. So you didn't stick to your word in the past. Will you do so now in 2024?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question.
And look, I think the issue of forced labor and making sure that there isn't any in our supply chains is an issue that we must take seriously, and we are. You have seen that we have made commitments to bring forward legislation, which we are planning to do. It's not quite the end of 2024 yet, but we are committed to doing that. We have a very strong agreement with the Americas and Mexico, precisely with a prohibition in the supply chain. We've got a Supply Chains Act that came into place in January 2024, and I think you're going to see that Canada is going to be the only country and the only jurisdiction that's going to have both a Supply Chain Act as well as strengthened forced labor provisions. But just a few days ago, I launched a consultation because this issue is actually quite complex, and I launched a consultation just a couple of days ago to make sure that we are working with the sector and all of those that are affected in putting forward this legislation to meet those strengthened requirements for Canada, U.S. in this relationship. And I'm confident that we will meet our obligations.
Bon, cette consultation-là, pourquoi?
So why did you not hold this consultation in 2023 when you made that commitment to March 2023 to do that by the end of the year? Now you're saying you haven't closed the door to creating the act by the end of the year, but why didn't you do this when you committed to it last time?
We have been talking to, we have been working on it all the way along, and it is in fact through the course of the work that it became clear to us that we needed to be out there a little bit more in much more detail with a wider group of people because of the complexities of how we would implement this. So it is really, really important. And in fact, if I go back to today's study, what we're really talking about is making sure that there is a level playing field. And in Canada, when I talk about Canada being an open trade country, but a fair trading country, fair trade means that we price in paying our workers. Fair trade means that we price in complying with environmental provisions. That is the kind of fairness that we need in the global marketplace, and forced labor and how we eradicate it out of our supply chains is something that we are taking very seriously. But we also want to get it right. So that is the work that my officials and that we are doing.
On sait que la production d'aluminium.
We know that Xinjiang aluminum production has spiked in recent years. We're at about 10% of the world supply right now, but a large part of this production is shipped outside of the region, and then it's mixed with other metals to create alloys, and this comes oftentimes from other parts of China, and this is often used in the auto industry. Human Rights Watch has said that once this metal is mixed with others, it's impossible to determine if the metal actually came from Xinjiang or another region of the world. It's also impossible to know how much of this forced labor metal was used, where exactly it comes from. But we know that there is forced labor metals that come into the world supply chain. The auto industry often doesn't know where the metals that they use come from. So do you share these concerns? And do you believe that Xinjiang metals are entering into the supply chains without producers and consumers being aware of it?
We should always be concerned when there's forced labor in the supply chain, whether it's aluminum or anywhere else. Just as we have implemented a system for melt and pour for steel, we are looking at a comparable transparency measure for aluminum. I think that that's really important. And in Canada, what is really terrific about our aluminum is that we do all of the production here. Green aluminum. If I look at the joint venture that's taken place in Quebec, which you will be very aware of, it's an important Canadian investment together with the Americans to make sure that our aluminum supply chain, that is so important because it isn't just for autos, it's for things like the aerospace industry and many other industries that depend on green aluminum. So I'm very proud of the investment work that we have taken very intentionally so that we are increasing our capacity to produce green aluminum here in Canada, mostly out of Quebec, to supply the follow-on value chain that will depend on that Canadian aluminum. But greater transparency is absolutely needed, and we're working on that for Canada's aluminum sector as well.
Thank you very much, Minister. Okay, we have a new member for the NDP. Mr. Cannings has moved to another committee. So welcome, Mr. Desiree. We welcome you to our committee. We get along very well here. We work well together, and we look forward to you being with us as well. So the floor is yours for 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much, the Minister, for being present in my very first committee meeting of international trade as international trade critic for the NDP, and it's a pleasure to be joining all my colleagues in this important work. I know the study on EV in particular as relates to the serious issue that's been brought to the New Democratic Party. Largely the issues pertaining to domestic protection of good union jobs here, but also to protect the integrity of workers across the globe, and that includes the workers that are being exploited that we know of in explicit cases in China. And so I'm really pleased to see the work related to these tariffs. I know it's an important piece to this work, and it's something that I'm pleased is finally happening. As you know, I'm a bit dismayed about the length it took, but I'm just glad we're here today, and tomorrow that will have an impact for our businesses here. So I want to thank you for that. You spoke in your opening remarks about the importance of the EV production sector here in Canada. You spoke about the relationship between the government and its investment of nearly $37 billion in the production of EV capacities here in Canada. Of course, that's going to take a tremendous amount of investment and work overseas. You're also simultaneously looking at trying to shore up supply chains for critical minerals elsewhere, including Ecuador. Is that correct?
What we're trying to do always in the work at Canada is to create resilient supply chains among many trading partners, and what I can tell you in terms of the supply chain or the critical minerals agreements that we have right now are with the United States, it's with Europe, it's with Japan, it's with Korea, it's with like-minded countries that will share our values with respect to the environment, but also workers, wages for workers.
To Ecuador, Minister, I think this is the important piece I'd like to focus on is, should Canada be producing or procuring critical minerals, in particular from countries like Ecuador, which, to my question, if you can answer to the best of your ability, are you and your ministry currently working on a trade agreement with Ecuador?
What my department and I have done is consulted widely on what a trade agreement could be like with Ecuador. So that consultation has taken place, and we've had good feedback on that. And maybe to answer your question this way, I want to assure you and Canadians that that Canada does trade leading with its values. And those values have got to be values that are good for workers and the environment, but they also must be inclusive in nature. So we expect Canadian companies that are operating anywhere in the world, including in Ecuador, to adhere to global standards that also have strong, ESG provisions in it. But I'll have to get an update from my officials around the status of the.
Maybe Mr. Stewart or Mr. Fowler, you can comment on just the accuracy of the statement. Is it true or is it false that Canada is participating in a discussion with Ecuador towards a free trade agreement? Is that true or false?
That is true.
Oh, thank you. And I think that's the important piece and clarity we need for Canadians. So the fact of the matter is you are in a discussion with Ecuador. They've recently, by way of a constitutional referendum, challenged their own population to question whether or not protection for their forests and for their natural resources, including the access to protection for water, something that Indigenous leaders were just here for. They came all the way from the rural parts of Ecuador. They came right to the doorstep of Canada's parliament here, and they're begging, pleading with this government that we listen to the very legitimate and very important demands that these nations have. These are real people that have occupied these traditional territories for millennia, much like Canada. And in Canada, we have a history of plowing over Indigenous rights. We talk about this every September 30th, for example. But when it comes to international trade, I think it's a perspective of that Indigenous people are becoming more participatory in, and that's a good thing. But it's important that we also call out the very damaging historical frameworks and systemic violence that largely stem from free trade agreements. And that's what's happening in Ecuador. We have brave women, Indigenous women coming forward to Canada's parliament. They shouldn't even have to do this, Minister, and this is what dismays me the most. They come to our parliament saying that they have to ask that Canada not move forward with these discussions unless it can guarantee that Canada will respect their free, prior, and informed consent. Minister, my question's simple. Will we as Canadians change our history in terms of how we interact in the global arena? Will we better regulate our companies, particularly mining companies? And will we participate in a process with Ecuador that truly protects the rights of Indigenous people there, which will include, or should include, their full acknowledgement of their free, prior, and informed consent, including the right to say no to a project? Is Canada committed to that globally? Because I'm certain that in Canada we have Indigenous leaders that question that locally.
Let me. There's not a lot of time, so I'm happy to continue this. The answer to the question, but IPECTA, so the Indigenous Peoples Economic Cooperation and Trade Arrangement, is something that Canada is a leader in, working with other nations, and
focus on Ecuador's case, just because they were just here.
I would say this: you should be reassured, as Canadians are, that when Canada enters into any dialogue and discussion, it's a dialogue and a discussion. It is not, and while that happens, it will always and has to consider the values that are really important to Canada. The value of Indigenous, the value and the importance of reconciliation and consideration of that in our, in all that we do, including in commerce and trade, including.
Does that know that? Like, will we respect the rights to prior and informed consent? Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much. On to Mr. Martel for 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here. Minister, I'd like to know, why did you not open up new markets for our manufacturers over the last 5 years, despite the fact that you know that we had been victim of reprisal from China?
Thank you so much for that question. And indeed, I would say we're very much working on opening up new markets. If you take a look at Canada's negotiation with Indonesia, a country in the Southeast Asia region made up of 277 million people, and our negotiations with the ASEAN, so the Association of Southeast Asians, that's made up of 10 markets. And the reason I say that in terms of your question is we are absolutely actively at the table right now in those negotiations. But more than that, I'm taking trade missions, actual businesses into those economies. And why is it really important? Because it's exactly as you said, they're new markets, 700 million people, the fastest growing part of the world with the fifth largest economy at $3.8 trillion US dollars. So I would say that we're working very hard, particularly with Canadian businesses, to enter into those new markets.
Vous savez, depuis que votre gouvernement est en place,
Since your government has began its mandate, the softwood lumber conflict with the U.S. has come back as an issue. And you have yet to find common ground for this, and the industry is suffering because of that. They went from 8% tariffs to 14% tariffs, and they're planning to increase those to 30%. So what are you going to do with that?
To my honorable colleague, this industry, as I know you well know, because it is so much a part of the community you represent, is just so important, and those tariffs are completely unjustified. What I want to do is to say to the forestry sector, those who certainly you represent and others across the country, that I very much appreciate and thank them for some very intensive dialogues that we've been having with them recently, knowing full well that these tariffs are not only unjustified, but we are quite concerned about them. I've been raising this with our American partners and with the USTR. I do believe that the best way forward continues to be an agreement, and I think that these tariffs are making it way too expensive, not only here, well, certainly for the Americans and for their home building industry. Know that it's important to keep doing this work, but it isn't just to get any deal. It has to be a deal that's good for our industry.
Madame la ministre, en tout cas,
Minister, what we're seeing is that the Americans don't seem to want to talk with Canada. Does your government not have enough leadership in this case? So they were slow to implement tariffs with China. Do you think that this will mean that we will have a more difficult relationship with the U.S. in the future as well?
Well, I think that the record of the government speaks for itself. We renegotiated NAFTA here. It doesn't matter who is in the White House. We will work with the Americans, and we're ready to work with the Americans. To your point about our relationship with the United States, we're building critical supply chains in parts of the economy that's really going to matter going forward. You are seeing us take action to align the North American competitiveness, certainly on automobiles, because we're so integrated. You are seeing us work together in areas like technology and semiconductors. We are at the table right now to make sure we have strong science and technology capabilities among us. This is two countries with democratic values and with a strong respect for the international rules-based order, and you're seeing more alignment than ever for a trading partner that is just so important to Canada.
je voudrais juste savoir, Madame, combien? Madame,
Minister, Europe exports its softwood lumber without American tariffs, but we export ours with these tariffs. So how is it that they're getting to export without tariffs, and yet we have to face these American tariffs? It's difficult to understand. We're their neighbor. We have been doing lots of trade with them. Why is that?
We need to get to an agreement, and we're working hard on that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Miao, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll be sharing my time with Vance Badaway here and welcome him to our committee. Before I pass it over to him, I'll ask the Minister, and thank you for appearing at our committee again. Canada being the largest trading partner in the United States, and as a member serving the community in the west coast of BC, we engage a lot of cross-border business. And I want to ask the minister, what are the impact of Canadian EV sector if the federal government did not put a tariff on the Chinese EV, and how will this affect our border trade?
Well, I have visited your neck of the woods, and I know how important Richmond is to to this relationship between Canada and the United States, and you have seen us take very, very strong action to make sure that Canada continues to build out this very important sector across the country in building out not only electric vehicles but the entire supply chain that is going to create and that already is creating great jobs in Canada. And I'm so pleased to see of late some really great innovations that are taking place in British Columbia, some which no doubt will, which no doubt is being looked at very carefully through Pacific Can, so that we can continue to develop this supply chain to create those jobs all along the value chain and the supply chain for EVs. It's really important that Canada stands up for fair trade and for open trade. It's really important that Canada protects its workers and its industries against both over-subsidization and overcapacity, which we are seeing, and that has an effect on the global trading system in a distortive way. So what you're seeing Canada take leadership here on is addressing those very real issues that we are seeing as a pattern across global trade, and I want to thank my colleague for always the input that you give to me from your domestic companies and investors, and how important this is.
Thank you. And I'll pass it over.
Mr. Badaway, 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister Ng, with global supply chains facing unprecedented challenges from geopolitical tensions to climate change impacts, Canada's role as a key player in international trade is more important than ever. I know you recognize that, especially with your travels of late. Given the importance of ensuring resilient and innovative supply chains, particularly for critical sectors like manufacturing, agriculture, technology, can you elaborate on the government's current investments in strengthening these supply chains? Specifically, how are we working with both international partners, local industry, to future-proof our trade corridors and ensure Canada remains competitive in the global market? And I'm going to get a bit deeper with respect to my second question, binational collaborations. Given our critical trading relationship with the United States, what efforts are being made to harmonize supply chain strategies between Canada and the U.S., particularly along key trade corridors like the Great Lakes-St. Lawrence region?
What a wonderful question coming from my honorable colleague. It's really, really important work, and particularly on the border, and you and I have talked about this, and I certainly have visited many in and around the Great Lakes region, around creating a more dynamic and fluid and hub that allows for more of that intermodal trade between our two countries. But to your first question, we are really working through Canada's trade architecture to create resiliency in supply chains. I think that everyone has seen, especially most recently during the pandemic, how impacted and how fragile those supply chains can be. So Canada is the only G7 country with a comprehensive trade agreement with every other G7 country, means that predictability of trade serves Canada well. That's why you're seeing investments come through, not only between Canada and the U.S. or Europe and Canada, but also think about the wonderful announcement that was made in Port Colborne just recently by a Japanese multinational company, $1.6 billion for an EV battery plant right around your neck of the woods. This is going to create 500 jobs in and around Port Colborne, in Niagara, in Ontario. It is this part of the work and creating the right conditions through our trade architecture that is giving confidence for other investors, other countries to be partnering with Canada, and through doing that together, we will have greater resiliency across the globe.
Thank you very much, Minister. Sorry to interrupt, but everybody wants their 2 minutes. 2.5 minutes, Monsieur Savard-Tremblay, please.
Alors, merci.
Thank you. Could you give us an update? We know that China began their dispute resolution with the WTO and with Canada on the topic of Canada's surtax on some products coming from China. Where are we with this now?
Well, thank you for that. Look, we are certainly we're certainly disappointed that that's the action that Canada that China has taken. We know that, as I said earlier, that our agri-food sector is among the best in the world, and that our farmers and our producers are always trade compliant. So that particular matter that you referred to is at the WTO, and we will work with our sector, as I do with the Minister of Agriculture, and at the WTO to defend it vigorously, as we always do.
Combien? OK, parfait. Aussi, on sait que, bon, donc, bien.
So there will also be a review of CUSMA next year. In 2020, there were votes and debate on this question. And it was stated that the steel and aluminum sectors don't have the same status and protections under the agreement. There was an agreement between our two political parties. We were going to vote against the agreement initially, but given this written promise from the government to closely oversee the Chinese dumping in Mexico, and that this would open discussions on aligning the status of aluminum and steel. Can you speak to this?
Thank you for that. We are right now out talking to Canadians and various sectors on the 2026 review. I think there's an opportunity for us to get into a more robust conversation there. And with respect to your comment around Mexico, Canada is looking at this and paying attention to it very carefully. It's really important that all of us as trading partners in North America stand up for not only what our obligations are in the agreement, but actually to make sure that the level playing field that needs to exist for us to be competitive in North America remains to be so. But I'm happy to have more conversations with you on that piece in particular.
Thank you very much, Minister. Mr. Desjardins, for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you again to our witness for being present. Minister, it's really important that we have the opportunity to ask these very important questions. I know it's limited time, so I apologize. In order to get clarity, I may interrupt, and I apologize to the interpreters as well for what I understand to be a difficulty with the time constraints. Economy. This is an important piece. It's important that we understand, I think, the need of an economy in whether it's a small local little community, whether it's a province, whether it's a federal government, or whether it's our world economy. The important purpose of our economy is to serve people and make certain that we can share resources with those who need it most. I think this is what Canadians believe we build an economy for, so that we can make sure that when they go home at the end of the day after putting all the work in, that they get a good paycheck, they have a good job, and that they're contributing to social good. Indigenous communities here in Canada have a bad relationship, to put it frank, with whether it was the Hudson's Bay Company, the very first monopoly, which isn't all that long ago. Our history is quite new in Canada, to more modern iterations. You talked about the trade architecture and how important that is to Canada. I'd suggest that the trade architecture is really weak in a certain area in regards to Indigenous peoples and the impact to Indigenous peoples by way of our trade agreements. This is historic. Canada had many, many movements. We don't have to look all that far in our own past to know that Save the Rainforest campaign, for example, that Canadians took in a historic way against international mining was just an example of how much Canadians deeply value land and deeply value people's connection to it. It's also true that this committee here passed a motion, and I want to thank my colleagues for that motion as in reference to a study on the trade agreement for Ecuador. On recommendation 5, it actually suggests that the government of Canada ensure that no trade agreement between Canada and Ecuador is concluded without full, transparent, and effective consultation with, and no agreement is implemented without the free, prior, and informed consent of the affected Indigenous people in Ecuador. I'll ask again, because I think it's really important that you see the consensus of this House, of this committee, and the consensus that I think Canadians have, which is that we must respect Indigenous people's rights to free, prior, and informed consent, even above Canada's very narrow trade interests, that it's more important to protect our integrity and our values. Than it is to ramrod a policy that would damage Indigenous people. Do you agree that it's important that we protect Indigenous people's free, prior, and informed consent in relation to projects domestically, but in your portfolio in particular when it comes to international issues or international trade agreements?
Your time is up, and there isn't sufficient time for the minister to. Okay, responder. Mr. Baldinelli, I'm trying to complete this round so that Ms. Fortier and Mr. Baldinelli get an opportunity. So 4 minutes, and then 4 minutes, Ms. Fortier, but Minister Champagne is here, and we need to get moving on. So, Mr. Baldinelli, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, it took your government 4 months after the U.S. acted to impose tariffs on the Chinese EVs and steel and aluminum to act. Despite the fact that you've announced these tariffs, late last week the government also announced businesses can now request exemption from these tariffs on Chinese EVs and steel and aluminum products. Minister, who asked you or who lobbied you to make these changes?
I think you're talking about remission orders. And I think that you would agree that listening to Canadian supply chain partners is really important. And some companies could be impacted directly as a result of these tariffs. And if companies are impacted by these tariffs, small and medium-sized companies, then there should be a remission order process to which we can help them.
Having the tariff in the first place, Minister, did Volkswagen and Stellantis request these changes because of your government policy? What's the point of having the tariff in the first place if you're going to allow companies to be exempt from them and essentially through this remission order? You've got huge investments, $500 million to build a Stellantis plant, $778 million to build the VW plant. Now, are you saying to our steel workers that these two companies can use steel products in the production of their facilities and in their products?
Surely your question is not saying to me that some construction company that might need to retool their supply chain and need the time to do it because they're getting imports at a certain time, from China at the moment, wouldn't need to get some help in order to rejig their supply chain. That is what remission orders are intended there to do.
Your failed policy, Minister. It takes 15 years to build a mine in this country.
Answer the question.
So
please.
So your failed policy on creating the supply chain, and now you're exempting people from the 100% EV rules on steel and aluminum. How do you square that with the Canadian workers that are out there and the jobs that are at risk?
The minister is attempting to answer the question. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you. When we do consultations, we talk to a range of businesses, from the large ones to the small ones. What we heard from some
300 workers at GM who had been laid off because their V6 line is closed down, because GM is no longer going to be moving forward as forward with its EV plans
there. Let her
there.
answer the question.
So I'll finish the first answer. When we talk to people, it includes some businesses in that supply chain who might be importing steel right now from China. And in an effort to make sure that they are not penalized, those in the supply chain who will take time to reshuffle their supply chain. It's to help them. It's to help those that are in the supply chain. That's what the remission order is intended to do. So that is the answer to your first question. Listening to Canadian businesses, making sure that the actions that we've taken, will not impact these other smaller businesses in the supply chain. That's what the remission orders are there for. And I'm glad that we're actually helping businesses along the supply chain because that is what we're here to do. We're here to implement tariffs strongly and not take it off, help those in the supply chain, like a construction company, like a manufacturer that actually might need them right now, to give them some time to reshift their supply chain away from product that is produced, not with the right labor standards and environmental standards.
Thank you, Minister. Ms. Fortier, please, for 4 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Bonjour. Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello. Thanks for being here today. It's very much appreciated. In your opening statement, you said that we need to be more competitive on a domestic level, on a worldwide level, and the Government of Canada has implemented measures to support economic growth and the full participation of all Canadians in this economy. Given the economic and geopolitical situation right now, we are looking in our committee at how we can support the full participation of women in the economy. In 2018, the Government of Canada created a Women Entrepreneurship Fund. This was $2 billion in investments. And now we also have the Women Entrepreneurship Strategy. And this is a $7 billion investment. And this applies to today's study. And I'd like to ask you questions pertaining to women's participation in the economy. So, you have met with different women entrepreneurs, and I'd like to know if you could talk to me more about the measures that the government is implementing to support women and what has been the impact of these programs on the performance of women-run businesses in terms of international trade.
Well, women make up 50% of our society, and for far too long, there aren't enough women business leaders or women entrepreneurs participating in our economy. That means not having the kind of productivity that we absolutely are able to have in Canada. So putting forward a women's entrepreneurship strategy, it's a $7 billion investment since 2018, is to do one thing: grow Canadian businesses, women entrepreneurs and businesses domestically or in Canada, but also as they grow into those international markets. What does that mean to the Canadian economy? The return on investment? $150 billion. You add more women to the Canadian economy, you're going to add $150 billion to the Canadian economy. That means jobs. That means more prosperity in communities. And if we do this globally, and this is the argument we always make, that I do with my, with like-minded colleagues, Canada is part of the Inclusive Trade Action Group that is growing a network of like-minded countries and colleagues as we trade to grow, to be very deliberate at creating more opportunities for women entrepreneurs to seize the opportunities. It's $12 trillion to the global economy. So it is really important that we invest so that women businesses can get access to capital, get access to the supports like mentorship supports, and that we measure this so that we are measuring the progress. So we have gone from 14% participation to now 17% participation of women-owned businesses in the trade missions that I have taken across to many, many different markets, from Africa to Europe to the United States and certainly in Asia. We have dedicated women-led trade missions, and I don't have the statistic in front of me, but happy to follow up. In the one mission to Japan that took place a couple of years ago, we are seeing actual commercial deals now result from those very trade missions. So it is investments in the Trade Accelerator program that helps these women understand what does it take to grow your business into the international market. It is through the ecosystem and organizations like the Asia Pacific Foundation that have led some of these trade missions so that they can get into market and grow. But I always say this, as an economic minister, that ain't enough. It's not enough to just invest $7 billion so that women can grow in the economy. You need affordable early learning and childcare so that a woman can be more productive in their business and in their work. We have 18-month parental leave that we legislated many years ago. I talk to businesses all around the world, and the women-owned businesses or women leaders in those countries marvel at Canada's leadership at an 18-month parental leave so that they can be a mom and own their business or be incredibly productive in the way that they choose to. And then we pass pay equity. Here's the thing. Women-owned businesses, they're never going to lead that legislation. You know why? Because women pay equally, no matter whether you're a man or whether you're a woman in your business. So while we have that legislation, is terrific, but I hope somewhere in the years to come, we will need it less and less.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister. Sorry, we're short on time here today and a lot of information, a lot of questions. So thank you and your officials very much. I will suspend momentarily. If Minister Champagne and his officials can quickly come to the table, we would appreciate it. So.